Hey, my friends, it's Mary Rose here. It's so nice to be with you on this Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time. We tell time in Pacific time because I am based in Southern California, just in case anybody was wondering why it's always Pacific time. I have nothing against the Atlantic. I grew up on the East Coast of North America, and I know the Atlantic very well. I have very fond memories of the Atlantic, but I switched oceans. What can I say? We are gathered here. Oh, look at all you folks saying hi. I love to see it. We're gathered here on YouTube and we're gathered here on Facebook. And we do this every Wednesday, more or less at 1 p.m. Pacific time, to talk about story structure, writing craft, and the mindset of the working writer. And I want to, before we get started, I want to remind anyone who might be interested in jumping into a course that I recently created and released that is all about writing scenes. You can go to the link that's below my streaming face to you. It's www.pathofthestoryteller.com/making-scenes and learn all about that course. It's a self-paced course, which means there are people taking it. You can just dive right in. Start at the beginning. You're on nobody's timetable but your own about this course. So, but it's not without my close personal attention, because as many of you have already discovered, if you leave questions for me in the comments below each lesson, I'm going to dive in and answer them. Some of you are talking to each other in the comments, which I love. So it's really become kind of a nice, vibrant space to study this very important topic of how we write scenes in fiction. So I hope you'll check that out. Now, let me say a quick hello to the folks who are already here and saying hello. Hillary, it's so nice to see you here. And it's wonderful to have you here. Mia, it's great to have you here. We are going to talk about something today that is not designed to hold you back, but it's designed to remove the obstacles that might be in your way about obstacles. We're going to quote Marcus Aurelius, always a sign of a good talk. Am I right? We're going to get a little bit into Stoic philosophy for just a second, but mostly we're going to talk about the idea of obstacles in our storytelling and how the necessity of creating obstacle after obstacle is not only what drives the story forward, but it literally generates the energy. I like to call it story energy. That's just my little way of thinking about it. But that energetic quality that great storytelling has, the thing that makes a story seem like it comes to life off the page, and it becomes an experience in the reader's mind. These characters that seem realer than real people, events that get like an iconic stature in the culture. Who could not know a reference to Hogwarts or the Emerald City, or what it means to cross the forest of Mordor, or like all of these things that become like a real part of our culture. You see this over and over again. They're fictional, and yet they somehow don't seem less than what we call real. They seem full of energy, just as alive as you and I. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm excited about it, and I hope that you'll ask questions. Before we dive in to our exploration of obstacles, let me just introduce myself to anybody who's new. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. I write books. I've done it for a long time. I've become best known for writing middle grade fiction, although that's not the only thing that I've ever written. And my most recent book is called Alice's Farm, A Rabbit's Tale, published by Macmillan. Prior to that, I wrote a 6-book middle grade series called The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, published by HarperCollins. I've also published books with Random House when it was Random House, Penguin when it was Penguin. Now they're together. This is the way it's going in publishing these days. There's a lot of merging going on. A lot of merging. Everyone's, kind of conglomerating. So we'll all, those of us who are interested in the publishing industry should definitely keep an eye on that process, because it will affect the landscape that we want to publish our books in. All right. So who's ready for obstacles? Are you all ready? I hope so. All right. So let's start with philosophy. My favorite topic, really, because what is philosophy but just sort of another way of thinking about storytelling, right? Philosophy is a kind of a practice of human beings thinking about thinking about what it means to be human, thinking about our relationship with nature, thinking about our relationship with each other. It's, it's novelists' work. It's just contemplating the human condition and trying to make sense of it. And this is what we all do. Now, Marcus Aurelius, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard of Marcus Aurelius, was a Roman emperor. And you would think that that would be enough to keep anybody busy. I'm sure it was a very demanding and full-time job, but he was also quite a thinker. And he is known as an important figure in Stoic philosophy, largely because he took the trouble to write down a lot of his thinking. And we all know when it comes to information from ancient times, we modern folk tend to gravitate towards the stuff that was written down because that's the stuff we know about. A lot got said, and probably some of it got written down that got destroyed and didn't come down to us. We don't have a record of it, but the stuff that did get written down and did come down to us, we focus on it because it's what we've got. Marcus Aurelius, like many of you, I imagine, used to keep a journal in which he wrote down his thoughts. And because he was an emperor, his ideas about human nature and what the right way to behave was, what motivated people, how to cope with misfortune, how to think about your values, he had a very practical application for all his thinking, because what he did, the way he made decisions mattered to the whole Roman Empire. So it was good that he thought about it a lot. I have to applaud him for this. And it's really useful to us that he wrote it down. The book that most people think of when they think of him is simply called Meditations. It's just his journal. He didn't write it for us to read it. It was him trying to work out how to be a good emperor, how to be a good human being, how to have a meaningful life. Good storytellers questions all. Here's the quote from Marcus Aurelius that I want to start our discussion with. It has to do with the idea of obstacles. And anybody who's been hanging around this YouTube channel for any length of time has heard me preach about the necessity for putting obstacles in the way of your hero, that story structure itself is woven out of this kind of constant deployment of putting obstacles in front of your hero, your main character. So that's that tie-in for here. So here's the quote from Marcus Aurelius. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. I'm going to say it one more time. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Now, there's a kind of colloquial shorthand for this quote. That's the quote as it exists, obviously translated into English, so not exactly what he wrote down. But the shorthand way in English is the obstacle is the way, right? There's a book about Stoic philosophy that has that title. People often use that shorthand. The obstacle is the way. But I like the nuance of the original quote. So we're going to keep going back to it. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Thank you, Marcus Aurelius. Now, before I get into, I've got, I guess, about eight bullet points I want to get into, really just exploring different aspects of what it means, what the word obstacle means, what we're talking about when we talk about the impediments in storytelling. I want to talk about something else that those of you who are part of the Path of the Storyteller community, you've taken the program, you're in Storyteller Circle now, perhaps, or you are newly enrolled in the Fall 2022 program. Congratulations to some of you out there who I'm very excited have signed up. There's a phrase that I kind of play around with, and it's this one. It's very simple: story energy, story energy. And when story energy is there, it's like, it's there. And when it's not there, it's not there. When story energy is there and you're writing, it's a story. They're not words on the page. They're characters doing things that the reader is invested in. It's energized. It's been animated. It's come to life. It's been ensouled, if you will. It's really come to life. It has energy. And when story energy is not there, it is literally just words on a page. And I think as writers, we all know what we want. We sit down to work and we put words on the page, but that's not the end result, right? We want to actually animate our words so that they are just the means to an end. And the end is this like living thing, this living creature of story that we're writing. And so the question, the Frankenstein question here is, where does this story energy come from? So I actually looked this up so that I could give you a vetted answer about where energy comes from. And when I say vetted, I mean that I went to the website of the National Geographic Society. Who better to answer this question of where energy comes from? We here on the planet Earth know that every scrap of energy that's coming our way is actually coming from the sun. So we could explore that idea and talk about the food chain and how all that energy gets kind of deployed around the planet. But the real question is, where does the sun get it? Where does the energy come from that the sun has so much that it's shining all of this energy? It comes our way, photosynthesis turns it into life, and thus we have a beautiful, blue marble of an earth. The sun manufactures energy through a process called nuclear fusion, which I'm sure that rings some bells with you. I'm going to read you the definition from the National Geographic Society. Solar energy is created by nuclear fusion that takes place in the sun. Fusion occurs when protons of hydrogen atoms violently collide in the sun's core and fuse to create a helium atom. Now, there will not be a quiz about this. We've had a moment of philosophy, and now we're having a moment of physics. But I just want to focus on this idea that the energy in the sun is created by nuclear fusion. It's caused when atoms violently collide in the core and fuse. So, in other words, they're not created. This energy is not created without collision. In this case, thank you, National Geographic Society, it's described as violent collision. Violent collision. So I just want to put that phrase out there as we talk about obstacles. The reason I would argue that we have to focus on obstacles is that this is where the story energy comes from. That if you look at a story as a kind of an energetic construct, ideally, that we've got to dig down deep, just like in the core of the sun, we've got to dig down deep to say, well, where is that energy being generated? And I think this is a useful image to remember that energy is not generated by everybody just lying around being comfortable. Energy is generated when things violently collide and fuse. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's where energy is created. So if you want a scientific explanation of why some stories feel like they're alive and some stories just feel like words on the page, you can always consult the National Geographic Society. Is what's colliding at the core of your story inside the cells, what's colliding and what's fusing. So this is the reason, just so you know. I always like to tell you why. I don't like to just give you a list of this is what I think is correct. I want you to know why I'm interested in this topic and why I urge you to be interested in it as well. So we're seeking story energy, and therefore we must be interested in collision. Not just collision, but fusion. In other words, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is so cool. All right, let me break this down. I've got about, as I said, I've got about 8 points that I want to go over today. As always, if you're here live, please feel free to add your comments and questions so that I can weave them into the conversation or answer them or just show them off for the illumination of your fellow storytellers. So my first bullet point, if you will, is to focus on this idea that the obstacle is the way it advances action. It advances action. Now, when we just use the word obstacle, it sounds like Somebody's going along, they hit an obstacle, and they stop. So what does Marcus Aurelius mean when he says it advances action? I'm going to look at this idea of energy being generated by the fusion of this violent collision and try to sort of stitch it together with what Marcus Aurelius said, which is that when you have some force that has a way that's on some kind of forward trajectory and an obstacle comes up, how does it advance action? It doesn't bring the action to a standstill. Why? Because there's a collision and a fusion. Collision and fusion. Now, collision is a fairly easy thing to understand when you've got somebody going this way and an obstacle in the way. There's a collision, right? But what is it about? What is this fusion? What is this fusion? How does it advance action? It is because the thing that is collided with prompts a reaction. The hero who is advancing and meets an obstacle must react to the obstacle for it to advance the action. So this is super important. It's one of the reasons that we talk about the quote unquote passive hero as being a no-no in storytelling. The obstacle is a trigger to action for the hero. Sometimes writers think about obstacles as things that will make the story grind to a halt, and they become leery of them because they don't want their heroes to be passive. They don't want the action to slow down. They don't want it to get boring. And they feel that if they keep putting obstacles in the way, it's like tapping the brakes of the storytelling. And I understand that, right? I hope that image makes sense to you all. And what I want to offer as my first little takeaway here is that when those obstacles pop up, they advance the action by provoking the hero to action. They must always provoke the hero to action. So I hope that makes sense. We've got a really interesting question from Anne about at what point we give our hero obstacles. Do we have a solution in mind? And let's save that question for when I get through my list, because I think it's a great question. That's a really great question. So really, I appreciate you posting that. All right, so that was the first thing. The obstacle is the way it advances action. Why? Because it must provoke the hero to react. The hero encounters the obstacle and does something. All right. Point number 2 that I want to make. The obstacle is not random and it's not generic. And so when Marcus Aurelius says that what stands in the way becomes the way, what I want you to see, as I'm going to just kind of keep toggling back and forth between this quote and what we concern ourselves with as storytellers. What stands in the way becomes the way. The series of obstacles that you put in front of your hero provoke the series of reactions that your hero takes in response. That series of actions that your hero takes is literally the plot of your book, right? Is it not? It's what your hero does. And so this reality that what stands in the way becomes the way is so true. It's so perfectly true for storytelling, because it's the obstacles that you invent that will kind of provoke everything that your hero does. And the things that your hero does are the dominoes, right, of action, reaction, this chain reaction that at the end of the day is what happens in your book. Your readers will read it and their friends will say, did you like it? They'll say, I loved it. And they'll say, oh, amazing. What happened? And what are they going to say? They're going to describe the things your hero did. Your hero did them because they were on a way. They had a way, and there were obstacles on the way. And what stands in the way became the way. What they ended up doing in response to the obstacles literally defines the path that your hero takes. It is the plot of your book. So this is really important for people who feel that plotting is some mysterious dark art, that it's so difficult, And I want to I just suggest to anybody who might be listening to this who finds that I just can't think of what my hero needs to do next, and who really feels like I just don't know what happens next. If the obstacle is the way, then one of the reasons that you're finding it so difficult to decide what your hero does next is that you're not giving them an obstacle to react to, right? If you don't know what your hero does next, what obstacle can you put in their path? Then you'll know what they have to do next. So consider that. Consider that. So the obstacle is not random or generic. It is literally the stuff of your storytelling. And so what I want you to consider is that when you are really thinking about what your book is about in terms of your hero's journey of change, what lesson your hero learns, what wound will get healed in the course of telling your story, all of the questions that we ask in the early stages of thinking about a book, as we contrive our main character, as we think about what they need to learn. Does Dorothy need to learn to, how to function in her family? And does her family need a bit of a correction? Does Bilbo Baggins need to learn to embrace and integrate both his adventurous Took side into his conventional Hobbit side, so that he's got, has a complete life's adventure, a complete life's journey, instead of a journey where half of him is cut off? Does Ebenezer Scrooge need to kind of shed his exoskeleton of bitterness and get back in touch with the fact that he's part of humanity, and rediscover the joys of connection? Like, whatever it is, chances are there's something like that. There ought to be something like that lives in the essence of who your hero is as a character. And as you design the obstacles, that is the journey that they're taking. And so when I say they're not random or generic, just keep it in mind that the things that you provoke your hero to do by putting those precise obstacles in their path are going to be the things that take them on that journey of transformation. So at a very basic level, you might say that I need an obstacle. I know I'll have my hero kidnapped and forced to climb Mount Everest or something. Like, you can make up stuff that's hard, definitely stands in the way. But is that what your hero needs to discover, needs to learn? Is it going to force your hero to react in a way that is part of their journey? So when I say it's not random or generic, this is what I mean. The obstacles that you come up with for your hero are literally designing this kind of rigorous course of training that is the cause of their journey of transformation. So that was number 2. So number 3, the obstacle must be commensurate with desire. What do I mean by that? There has to be a want in place for an obstacle to make sense, And anybody who might not have been around last Wednesday or hasn't had a chance to watch the replay yet, I did a whole talk about what your hero wants. So today's topic, in a sense, is almost like the natural continuation to that, talking about what your hero wants. And now today we're talking about the obstacles that get in the way of that want. An obstacle is more than just a bad thing happening. If we're all sitting around on my sofa, watching, I don't know, a new episode of Star Trek Picard or something really fun to do like that. I wish we could all do that. That would be so fun. We might just want to keep watching the show. And what might happen that would be an obstacle to that, particularly, the power could go out, the cat could knock over the television set, we could kind of implausibly get into an argument, someone might want to watch something else. Well, that person would clearly be wrong. But you see what I mean? The obstacle has to somehow align with what is wanted. So the obstacle doesn't come out of nowhere and be about anything. it has to line up with what the hero wants. And when I say commensurate with desire, if the hero really wants what they want, the obstacle has to be at least of a size to match that, commensurate with desire. So if I really want to watch this television show and my cat coughs up a fur ball on the remote, it's an obstacle, but I really want to watch the show. So I'm going to wash off the remote and carry on. Like this is a little gross example, but you've met my cats. They're here. They do cat-like things. So this is just what's on top of mind for me today. It's not that big an obstacle because I really want to watch it. If I didn't really want to watch it, that might be enough to say, ew, forget it. I'm throwing away the remote. I don't need to watch television anymore. Like, right? So just think about how much your hero wants what they want. And consider that if you want your obstacles to be interesting enough to create the way to sort of design the plot of your book, then your hero's going to really need to want what they want. And your hero's want might need to change over time, and just in terms of intensity. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Actually, that's another bullet point. But think about leveling up the obstacle to really be worthy of the hero's level of want, and make sure that the hero's level of want is worthy of creating a really interesting obstacle, because that's going to create the hero's reaction and define what happens next in your plot. So bullet point number 4, lack of opposition is a red flag always. Now, those of you, again, who've been through the Path of the Storyteller program who meet with me once a week in the Storyteller Circle, which is the membership for alumni of the program, you know that this is something that we talk about a lot. If there's no force of opposition visible on the page, this is a huge red flag. And I don't mean that there's no force of opposition in the chapter, I mean, there's no force of opposition in this sentence, in this paragraph. Like, it should be there in a sense all the time. Why? Because it's the way. It is literally the way. And many writers feel like that is just something to just drop in, like salting a dish after it's cooked. But I'm here to agree with Marcus Aurelius that it is what advances the action. What stands in the way becomes the way. If nothing stands in the way, what exactly are you putting on the page? Where is this violent collision that leads to fusion that's releasing story energy? Which pages of your manuscript are you hoarding all the story energy on? Are you only putting story energy on the last page of each chapter? See, this is something that we see sometimes, right? That a writer will go on and write something, and then they'll either remember or intuitively feel that, I better make something happen. And so there'll be some kind of twist or obstacle or revelation in like the last paragraph of the chapter. But you can't actually expect your reader to read 4 pages with no story energy in order to get to the one paragraph that has the little whiff of it. You really want that energy to be on every page. So a lack of opposition is a red flag always. I really want you to take that to heart. Where can you put in some kind of force of opposition? Commensurate with the hero's desire. One of the tips from last week's video was to think both in terms of the hero's big wants, but also in terms of their little wants. A hero can want a little something, and then also want bigger things at the same time. We're almost all of us in a perpetual state of having impulses toward or away from something. We want to sit down. We want to stand up. We want a glass of water. We wish we could go outside. We want to get a text from someone that we're waiting to get a text from. We want to, we want to get something good in the mail. Like we're just perpetually wanting things. We always are seeking something. It's one of the reasons people scroll social media. Am I right? We're seeking boredom, a respite from boredom. We're seeking a little stimulation. We're seeking evidence of, I don't know, good news. Maybe somebody liked something that we posted. We're just craving. Human beings crave. We just crave. So there's always some level of want that you can play with on the page. And as soon as your hero wants something, then that little force of opposition is there. And this is fantastic because what does it give you? Story energy. All right. Now, let's go back to this idea of obstacles being commensurate with desire. So this is my 5th bullet point. The obstacles escalate. They escalate. They don't stay on the same level all the time. Now, if that's the case, you can imagine that in order for the obstacles to escalate, if they are in fact commensurate with the hero's desire, then the hero's desire may be escalating as well. The hero's desire may be escalating as well. And these are some of the things that you can play with in storytelling. Now, there's lots of ways to escalate the hero's desire. They might make fresh discoveries about what they want. They may get more in touch with the deeper reasons that they want the thing that they want. They may feel a growing sense of optimism as they get closer to their goal. You may include something at the midpoint of your story that raises the stakes of what is the fulfillment of the hero's desire. That now it's really important that they get what they want, because if they don't, it's going to be awful, more awful than they thought it would be. Maybe there's something personal that gets thrown in the mix that makes it more urgent. Maybe a ticking clock of some kind makes it more urgent. So we talk about a lot of these different ways to amp up the urgency of storytelling. But each one of those is really designed to do one thing, which is to increase the hero's desire, to make them want it more, to make them willing to go further outside their comfort zone, to dare more, to be even more cunning, to maybe switch from playing defense to playing offense in the pursuit of whatever it is that they're going after. And guess what happens? The obstacles will also escalate because they have to. The kinds of things that would have really given your hero a bit of a workout at the beginning of the second act are going to be like nothing by the time you get them to the end of the second act, because they've changed. Your hero is changing all the time. So your hero's desire is changing in its intensity and urgency, and thus so are the obstacles. So that's really important to know. So that was number 5. Number 6, equally important. And this is really at the core of the storyteller's job. So I want you to really take this to heart, everybody. The obstacles must have variety. They must have variety. So it's not just a question of escalating by doing the same thing, only worse. You have so much creative capacity at your disposal. You are, as you've often heard me say, the bosses of your books. And so you get to explore every nook and cranny of the world that you have created for your hero in order to figure out all of the different kinds of obstacles that you can put in their way. Now, there's all kinds of internal and external obstacles. I'm just going to mention a few, but there's no like master list of obstacles. This is really your job as storytellers, is to pay attention to what it feels like to be human within yourself and also in the world you observe, and really notice the ways that people act in the world and what stands in their way or what they perceive of as standing in their way. Certainly emotions like fear, shame, low self-worth, lack of confidence. Like there can be internalized obstacles that are just psychological and that may have sources in the hero's backstory, and that, you know, they're true and human, and so they are definitely part of our storytelling toolkit. But I just want you to also be wary of using them as your, like, the only color on your palette, because a hero that is so internally blocked from action is gonna have a hard time reacting to all the obstacles, and you want to be able to give a variety of obstacles. You know, a hero may have sort of some kind of primary obstacle of anxiety, or you know, something that they're grappling with that's internal, but you're gonna have to still find the variety in it. So there's all of these internal emotions. There are social forces that are really useful obstacles. There's tons of stories that revolve around people trying to escape poverty or get money, or, you know, they start out poor and they make good, or they, you know, go after some kind of improvement in their material status. You know, a lot of the plots of Jane Austen's novels kind of focus on the financial and social constraints on women and what they do to get out of it, and how those constraints impact their life choices, and all of the things. So these are really important things to weave into your storytelling. Don't leave them out. There are environmental obstacles, of course. The landscape that you create may be full of things that stand in the way. There may be long, difficult terrain to cross. Look at Bilbo Baggins. Like, he's got to travel quite a long distance to get to where he wants to go. McMurray in A Wrinkle in Time has to get across the universe, basically, in order to get where she wants to go. So these are also obstacles that you can play with. And obstacles are not always unpleasant, right? There are temptations as well. There are temptations. What I'm sure one of our mythologists here will know, like the story of the Odyssey by Homer, in which Odysseus like has to get home, or wants to get home, allegedly after being away for 10 years fighting the Trojan War. He wants to get home, and it takes him 10 years to get home because he keeps getting beset with obstacles. And some of the obstacles are very pleasant. You know, he ends up on islands where there's like this really cushy life and wine, women, and song, and he gets tempted to stay there. So sometimes those sort of temptations are obstacles. So very pleasant things can be obstacles as well if they distract the hero from the path that they're supposed to be on. Distraction as well, one could say, is a different kind of obstacle. Any form of distraction. You know, this literally the siren song that's we often see referenced in mythology is something that gets in the hero's way. Obviously, enemies, powerful enemies who are actively using, you know, either cunning or manipulation or brute force or whatever it is to prevent the hero. These are other kinds of obstacles. And tests of character are great obstacles, you know, and a test of character is a really interesting thing to include, because it's we were just talking the other day about the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy encounters the Tin Man. She's supposed to be on her way to the Emerald City. That's where she wants to go. The way is literally beneath her feet. It's the Yellow Brick Road, and she encounters this Tin Man, and he's rusted, and it seems like, is it a distraction? Is it a temptation? Like, is she afraid of him? Like, which of the obstacles is it? It's really a test of character. And the test of character is she going to take a couple of minutes out of her personal journey to help another creature? And Dorothy passes this test of character by absolutely stopping to help him. And guess what? That test of character is an obstacle, and it becomes the way, because now she has a fellow traveler who has special abilities that are going to come in useful later, and he's going to become instrumental to her succeeding on her journey. This is such a great example of the fusion. Like, two things collide. One of them is a little girl from Kansas who wants to go to Oz, or wants to go to the Emerald City, and the other one is a rusted Tin Man who's by the path. They collide. He's not helping her get there. He's stopping her. He's an obstacle, right? It's a test of character, which she passes, and then they get to fuse. New story energy is released. This is a significant new relationship. It's a fellow traveler who's going to be crucial to her ultimately getting what she wants. So think about even things like that, tests of character. And the last one that I'll mention, and this is all just an exploration of the kind of variety of obstacles that you get to invent because you're a creative person and you're a storyteller. Appeals to guilt or attachment are also kind of interesting obstacles because they can come again in a very like tied up in a bow way. They don't feel like somebody who's the enemy. They feel like somebody who's saying, wait a minute, what about us? Or wouldn't it be wrong to do that because you have these other commitments? Isn't that too dangerous? Shouldn't you say no to that? If you change in this way, we won't recognize you. You won't belong here anymore. It's definitely something that Bilbo has to contend with. So there are as many types of obstacles, as the day is long. And so I've just run through a few different categories of them. But this is really something where your job as a storyteller takes precedence. The types of obstacles and the forces of what stands in the way that you invent are going to rise from the way you see the world and the way you experience life. And this is one of the ways in which your worldview as a writer, your voice, in a sense, is going to find its way onto the page. So as easy as it is to say, yeah, those are all really good obstacles or good categories of obstacles, I really just offer it as an example of the types of variety that you can seek, because ultimately it's going to be your close observation of life that is going to give you the material to invent, to write about in the stories that you want to tell. So that was number 6. Obstacles have variety. Number 7. This is a good one. The forces of opposition have motivation too. So I just want you to remember that just as the obstacles are designed to create the way for your hero to have their journey of transformation, you also get to really think in 3 dimensions. Because yes, they're serving the hero's journey, but you also get to create dimensional forces of opposition that have motivations of their own. And I would strongly recommend you do that. We all know what it's like to read a story and the forces of opposition might just be kind of a generic bad guy. And it's just like they're bad guys because they're bad. They're bad because they're bad. Listen, there's a fair amount of storytelling out there that runs on that somewhat 2-dimensional track, and I'm not saying that it doesn't work. It certainly can work. It often works in very broad kind of commercial application, storytelling that's just really streamlined and direct. It's kind of good guys versus bad guys storytelling. But as novelists, I challenge you to just take it one step past that, or maybe plenty of steps past that, and consider if you can give the forces of opposition motivations of their own, because it will enrich your storytelling so much. It will really enrich your storytelling. Now you've got a dance between equals, right? You've got a hero who's going to encounter forces of opposition, obstacles that will rise up in the way. They will react. And so that is how, what stands in the way becomes the way. But if your opposing characters have a similar complexity of action and reaction, you've got some really rich storytelling on the page. And this is where the magic really happens. These are the kinds of books that only get better with rereading, because there's such a richness of vision in there. And this is where it comes from. It really just comes from taking that little extra effort to imagine, like, what is the dance of motivation, desire, opposition, action, reaction that's happening on both sides of the equation. All right. And here's my last one. And then we're going to go look at some of these really great questions. I see, Jaren, you've posted a question as well. So let's look at them. The last bullet point I wanted to make sure we cover today is just a reminder that for something to stand in the way, there must be a way. There has to be a path that's being pursued. There has to be that sense of the hero's desire in action. So they go together. Obviously, we're talking about a violent collision. So you have to create both sides with an equal amount of potential energy to be released. There has to be a way, and we call this in our Path of the Storyteller vocabulary. We call this the mission. Your hero has to be doing something. They've got to be on their way somewhere to do something for some reason. That's the way. That's the path that they're on. And it's only when that's been activated that these forces of opposition have something to collide with, right? If I'm sitting here and I'm next to a wall, it's only a force of opposition if it's in my way of my path to go through it. If I want to be on the other side of it, if I pass a locked gate, but I have no interest in getting on the other side of that fence, it's not really an obstacle, is it? So start always with the hero's desire, with what the hero wants, whether it's a little want or a big want, or ideally you're going to be layering the little wants in the scenes that you write so that they add up to the big wants of the hero's mission for the whole book, this book-length journey of transformation. Never let go of that, right? Never let go of the hero's want, because in order for something to stand in the way, there must be a way to stand in the middle of. All right. So those are my bullet points for today. And this timed out well. Let me just take a look. We'll go back to Anne's question. I'm going to bring it up on screen. Anne asks, she was wondering, she was reading The Unseen Guest yesterday. Oh, how lovely. That's so nice, Anne. I hope you were having fun. The Unseen Guest is one of the volumes of the Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place series, for anybody who doesn't know. And Anne asked, did I give my hero obstacles before I had a solution for her in mind? This is such a good question. I bet a lot of you have seen Finding Nemo, and there's this great sequence in Finding Nemo in which our hero, who's just like a little fishy in the sea, I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone. It's hardly a new movie. But in which our hero Nemo finds himself in a fish tank on land. And I remember the first time I saw this movie, I'm sure I was watching with my kids, but the storyteller in me was like, Nemo's in a fish tank. If that isn't the best definition of storytelling I've ever heard, I don't know what it is. You take your tiny little hero who lives in the sea, you put them on land in a fish tank. There is literally no way that they can get out of this. It is so extreme. It is such an obstacle. And yet, the very diligent storytellers at Pixar figured out a way. And what I preach when I use this story as an example, Anne, is don't be afraid to put Nemo in the fish tank. You may not know how you're going to get Nemo out of the fish tank, but if you think of it, if it occurs to you that would be like the really coolest, like worst thing I could do to my hero is put them in a fish tank, like far away from the sea. If it occurs to you, I say chase that impulse down. Don't be afraid to do it, because it may be that only after you've done it and you're drafting scenes and you're really thinking hard that you, like your hero, will discover this completely crazy, unexpected way to get your hero out of the fish tank. And those will be the best scenes in your book. Those will be the most unforgettable scenes, because the obstacle and the desire both skyrocketed. They escalated. They are commensurate with each other. You got such a serious obstacle there now that poor Nemo's really got to want to get back to the sea in order for this to all, play out this is where the storytelling really peaks, really the story energy, right? That collision that releases the story energy is just so intense. You've turned the dial way up. So I can't speak with accuracy to a question about when you wrote this scene in this book, 10 years ago, which came first, the obstacle or the solution, because I literally don't remember. I wouldn't ever remember something like that, but I know my process well enough to know that it could have been either way, and very likely was more of a sense of seeking the obstacle that felt like it was going to lead to the way. And then saying, okay, well, now how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get my hero out of this fantastic new obstacle that I have created? So it could have gone either way. If you already know how your hero is going to get out of it, just make sure it's not too easy. Just make sure you haven't made it too easy, because you don't want your reader to see your hero get confronted by an obstacle where it's pretty obvious how they're going to get out of it, right? Like, you don't want it to be. You want your reader to have the reaction that I had when I was watching Finding Nemo and saying, "Oh, Nemo's in the fish tank. Nemo will never get out of the fish tank. What's going to happen next?" There was literally no way to stop watching at that point because it was just such great storytelling. So don't be afraid of that. Jaren has a question. Is it always necessary to determine the hero's goal before creating obstacles? Jaren, I'm going to argue yes. I think I'm making that point today. But when you say the hero's goal, that's a kind of a singular idea. And I think one of the things I'd like you to consider is that your hero is going to have like a book-length mission. Get me home to Kansas, wizard. Let me meet that dragon in the lonely mountain and steal this gold, or let me go across the universe and find my dad who's been kidnapped by a disembodied brain. Like, there's usually like a single mission that's going to drive most of the story. Solve a crime, find out who the murderer is, or win the love of Mr. Rochester on my own terms. Like, you can sum it up in a sentence for most books, which is a really good thing. But in every scene along the way, there's going to be these little wants that I talked about last week. And so when you are designing obstacles, they have to be in opposition to something. And so that's why I say yes to your question. I do think it's necessary to determine the hero's goal before creating obstacles, because if the hero has no goal, what is the obstacle an obstacle to? What's it in the way of? Right? Kind of like my image that I shared a few minutes ago. If, like, I'm just sitting on my lawn chair next to a fence that's got a locked gate, that locked gate is only an obstacle to me if I have a strong desire to get on the other side of the fence. If I'm happy where I am, it's not an obstacle. It's just a locked gate. You see, it's not infused with any sense of collision. I hope that's clear. And Anne has a comment as well, which I will bring up so we can discuss. And anybody else who's got something to add or a question to ask, this is a great time to post it. Anne has left a comment. So interesting how both being too easily distracted or too focused on the hero's own goal could both be real and interesting obstacles. Absolutely. It's the sky's the limit. When it comes to inventing obstacles, the sky is the limit. The things that distract or tempt your particular hero are going to be really personal. They're going to be unique. And finding that those specifics is really going to help bring your story to life. We have talked in the past about how human beings do tend to have like basic drives, survival, connection, achievement, self-actualization, all that good Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But that in no way diminishes your creative capacity to invent really particular things for your hero to be concerned about, to be obsessed with, to be distracted by, to be motivated by. What quirks, character traits can you give them? And this is why I again, I bring all of this around to wanting to put the power back in your hands, storytellers. You truly are the bosses of your books. These principles about, hero's desire versus obstacle, these are like the laws of physics of storytelling, right? It's like, thank you, National Geographic Society. We definitely all share the same ambition for our work, is that it be filled with story energy, engage the reader, just lift off the page, feel like real people having real experiences. This is the quality of the books that we love. This is the quality we want to accomplish in the books that we write. But how you get there is up to you. That's a principle. That's a principle that you can play with and make your own. And I want you to feel empowered by it, and not just another like category of, oh, this is something else I have to get right in my storytelling. It's like, yes, it's something you have to get right in principle, but the specificities of what your hero wants in a big way and in a small way, and the inventiveness with which you can put impediments to action in their way that will advance the action, right? Back to Marcus Aurelius. That's all up to you. And that is the fun of doing creative work. Am I right? It's thinking of all that stuff. Can you imagine the cheer and the high fives that went up in the writer's room for Finding Nemo, if in fact there was a writer's room? Maybe it was a lone writer just having a brainstorm. When they came up with the idea of putting Nemo in the fish tank, that's a day of celebration in a storyteller's life. When you come up with something like that, that's pure storytelling gold. Celebrate it. We live for those moments, right? That's what makes the work fun. All right. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to bring up a little farewell message from our own Katie, who I didn't get to say hello to earlier. Katie, it's so great to have you here. Right on point. I needed this. Very good. Listen, there's never a time as storytellers that we don't need like reminders about the core principles of storytelling. They don't change. And it's one of the reasons that we don't get bored with being writers. It's one of the reasons that writers write their whole lives long. We don't get bored with it. The job is always fresh and full of variety and invention, right? Because there's always new desires to put into play in our storytelling, and the capacity to keep inventing fresh obstacles. So I wish all of you a very happy writing week. I'm so glad that you were here live. Super fun to have this talk with you. Appreciate your comments and your presence very much. If you're watching the replay, you've got some stuff to add, just post it in the comment below. I'll see it, and I'm happy to have a little conversation with you in the comments. Even if you just watch the replays, you are part of the Path of the Storyteller community. I really want you to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. That would be an awesome thing to do, and offer a thumbs up to the content if you found it of value. I am going to be back here on Wednesday. And in the meantime, I hope that there aren't any impediments to your writing practice, except the kind that spur you to action. I look forward to hearing about them the next time we get together. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.